from the heart of the city too busy to hate. A progressive voice making too much sense for corporate media's comfort. This is The Ron Show, where we the people come first. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Hello, and thank you for listening, whether it's on Georgia Now, weekdays 4 to 6 p.m., the replay the following morning, 8 to 10 a.m. on Georgia Now, or 11 p.m. Progressive Voices via TuneIn. Maybe you listen where you podcast. That's cool. Just follow The Ron Show where you podcast if you're not doing that. Listen, second half of the show, it's going to be a fantastic conversation with professor and author Andrew DeCourt. Andrew wrote a book that just came out last fall. It's entitled Reviving the Golden Rule, How the Ancient Ethic of Neighbor Love Can Heal the World. He also posted something to social media in the aftermath of J.D. Vance's white nationalist screed at the most recent Talking Point USA pep rally. I'll share a good bit of that post and that conversation in the second hour of today's show. In essence, he's responding to this.
Unlike the left, we stand against treating anybody, and I love what Nikki said about this. We don't treat anybody different because of their race or their sex. So we have relegated DEI to the dustbin of history, which is exactly where it belongs. In the United States of America, you don't have to apologize for being white anymore.
Okay. I've never had to apologize for being white. Andrew DeCourt wrote in his Facebook post in the aftermath, there's the real heart of the matter. White fragility, white nationalism. He says across America's history, 44 of 45 presidents, 98% have been white. 112 out of 116 Supreme Court justices, 97% have been white. The overwhelming majority of our 12,583 congresspeople have been white. He said it took almost 100 years before a black man, Hiram Revels, was even elected to Congress in 1870. He then points out that Talking Point USA's AmFests had 90% of its speakers on the website white or white passing. He continues, imagine having that much of a monopoly on political power in a country and still celebrating that you've dismantled programming for more equitable leadership across the country. A step further, imagine having that much of a monopoly on political power in a country and still styling yourself as a disadvantaged or oppressed group who needs defending. Andrew writing, that is a level of insecurity and self-obsession that boggles my mind. Yeah, me too. Anyway, Andrew DeCourt joins us second half of the show here on The Ron Show, Georgia Now, Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. I want to start, however, with the anniversary that is January 6th. It is the 5th anniversary of January 6th. Did you leave your ivermectin and plate of moon pies or whatever else Al-Qaeda or Meal Team 6 loves to imbibe on? Did you leave that out overnight so that the QAnon shaman could leave toys or trinkets in your Crocs? I joke, but this is a serious date, one that should evoke some sort of moment of clarity. And instead, since we've seen an emboldenment of righteous indignance, sweeping pardons by the president who ginned up all that sentiment. I know what he said on that date. I know he said, we're going to go down to the Capitol peacefully, patriotically. I know that. It's not just those words on that date. It's what led up to those words and on that date that fomented a mob. Never mind that he, a well-heeled, wealthier than ever man, hadn't learned his lesson. No, now his base figures, he not only can get away with shooting a man in broad daylight, we can get away with whatever we need to do at his beck and call because he is going to pardon us. That is the party of law and order, y'all. However, one J6 protester appearing before that subcommittee hearing House Democrats held today was a glimmer, just a small glimmer of hope.
My name is Pam Hemphill. I'm a mother and a grandmother and a cancer survivor and a retired addiction counselor. I am also a convicted criminal for what I did on January the 6th, 2021. Thank you for having me back to the Capitol today. I am deeply grateful for this chance to try to make amends and talk about what happened 5 years ago. Once I got away from the mega cult and started educating myself about January the 6th, I knew what I did was wrong. I pleaded guilty to my crimes because I did the crime. I received due process, and the DOJ was not weaponized against me. When Donald Trump pardoned us, I rejected the pardon. Accepting that pardon would be lying about what happened on January the 6th.
Amen.
I am guilty, and I own that guilt. 5 years ago, I traveled from Idaho to D.C. to see Donald Trump speak. I had fallen for the president's lies, just like many of his supporters. Local people had welcomed me into the circle when I was around them. I heard them saying things like, the Democrats are trying to turn this into a communist country, or the radical left wants to do away with our Constitution. The gaslighting caused a lot of fear, and I was scared. With that fear in my heart, I came here on January the 6th. I went from Trump's speech to the Capitol because I thought Mr. Trump would go to the Capitol with us.
He did not.
I heard people saying that Trump was going to walk down to the Capitol, so I went.
He did not.
Well, as you know, Donald Trump never showed. But the rioters did. And the attack began. The police officers were the heroes. They protected the Capitol and everyone inside the Capitol, and even people like me. I was trampled on by the rioters. And if it weren't for the Capitol Police helping me that day,
Isn't that something?
I might have died. To the Capitol Police officers sitting here, if I may address you for a minute. I am truly sorry from the bottom of my heart for being part of the mob that put you and so many officers in danger. I want the Capitol Police to know how truly grateful I am to them and how deeply sorry I am. I can't believe people are still disrespecting you and trying to lie about January the 6th. I will do everything I can to stop the lies about our brave officers like you who protected us during the attack. Thank you. Speaking about January the 6th has caused a great risk to my personal safety.
Gee, why is that?
I have been doxxed online, harassed, and physically assaulted. But I am here, and I don't care. I won't let it stop me. I can't sit here while Mr. Trump and others are lying. I also want others who feel like me to know that we must stop the lies being pushed by the Republican leaders and Trump himself. Thank you again for having me here. I am glad for the opportunity to speak to you and answer any of your questions.
That woman showing more bravery, more courage, more character than the overwhelming majority of Republican culture as we know it today. That event and the undoing of the reckoning for it aren't unlike the rest of the nation's history, though. Think of the Civil War. And once those insurrectionists succeeded in getting President Lincoln assassinated, the work to ensure that traitors paid the price and the nation moved ahead with reconciliation and the wronged were compensated justly was derailed. We never addressed it. More than 150 years later, we never addressed it, and instead got decades of lost cause indoctrination, Jim Crow nefariousness that was, in essence, the pouring of the now hardened foundation for the white nationalist power structure that's put the GOP in power and doomed this country to, as far as I can see, fighting about injustices, then to now, to in perpetuity. Not unlike, incidentally, the Daughters of the Confederacy working to whitewash curricula in history textbooks in states that they had influence over. The smothering of any notion of critical race theory or a true reckoning of this nation's history that's not rah-rah patriotism alters a true detailing of our nation's history to continue indoctrinating future American minds into believing all of what makes this country great, and there's plenty that makes this country great, without recognizing what has and still holds us back otherwise. It was 350 days ago that Donald Trump pardoned 1,500 plus January 6 rioters, 44 of them from Georgia, by the way. That according to reporting from Jeff Daughtry at WUGA, who wrote, with a swipe of his pen, President Donald Trump fulfilled a campaign promise on Monday night, issuing sweeping pardons that erased 4 years of federal investigations and prosecutions of the rioters who stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. The pardons are for 1,500 defendants, including 44 Georgians. Among the 44, 16 received periods of incarceration ranging from 20 days to 5 years in prison, with 7 receiving sentences of less than 2 months. 9 Georgia defendants received probation rather than prison. 13 Georgians have not taken a plea deal or had their charges brought to court and are out on bond. Only in very rare cases were defendants held without bond, and defendants commonly were given appearance bonds, meaning they promised to return for hearings and did not have to post a monetary bond. Nearly 36 of those who were pardoned by Donald Trump 350 days ago have since committed crimes again. That, according to research done by the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Linnea Honel-Stunkel and Sofia Barriga Hernandez, along with Alyssa Melman, with that reporting. That's not even accounting for the alleged pipe bomber who was arrested, who may actually have been pardoned before he even got arrested by this sweeping pardon proclamation by Donald Trump. They write, at least 33 J6 insurrectionists pardoned by Trump have been arrested, charged, or sentenced for other crimes since January 6, 2021, according to new analysis by Crew. 4 pardoned insurrectionists have allegedly reoffended since receiving their pardon. Several have argued that the pardon should cover unrelated criminal convictions. And in one case last month, Trump explicitly re-pardoned one insurrectionist for his unrelated weapons charges. Party of law and order, y'all. 6 of the pardoned J6 insurrectionists are charged with committing child sex crimes, ranging from sexual assault to possession of child pornography. At least 5 were charged with illegal possession of weapons, including at least 2 who had a previous domestic violence conviction. 5 were arrested or charged with driving while impaired or under the influence. In 2 of these cases, the defendant's reckless driving resulted in a fatality. We don't know that victim's name like we do Laken Riley's, though. 2 were charged with rape. In 4 cases, the insurrectionists allegedly reoffended after receiving their pardons from Trump. Most recently, Christopher Moynihan was charged with a felony for threatening to murder House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries in October. Fine people. John Andrews was convicted in June for violating a peace order by following the mother of his child in violation of a court order. Brent Holdridge and Zachary Allen were charged in May with burglary and breaking and entering, respectively. Fine people. Other insurrectionists, Crew writes, had interactions with law enforcement that highlight the dangers posed by Trump's decision to grant them clemency. Matthew Huddle was killed during a traffic stop when he reportedly resisted arrest and was armed. Thoughts and prayers. Nathan Pelham fired on police when they arrested him. The nature and severity of the unrelated crimes January 6 insurrectionists have been charged with underscores the significant public safety threats posed by Trump's decision to forego long-established DOJ process and grant blanket day one pardons and commutations to insurrectionists. And as I mentioned, even the pipe bomber now may well have cover because of that pardon. That's not just me cooking up some conspiracy, by the way. Alexander Willis at Raw Story reports that President Donald Trump's sweeping pardons for those involved in the January 6th Capitol riot may end up inadvertently applying to the individual accused of planting pipe bombs at the DNC and RNC national headquarters, something the Justice Department is reportedly worried about, according to Politico. The man accused of planting bombs in Washington, D.C. on the eve of January 6, 2021 is Brian Cole Jr., who already gave a detailed confession to law enforcement about his role in the plot. Trump supporters have been fixated on the case, given that a number of prominent MAGA figures, including former FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino, hyped it up as potentially being an inside job. Trump's sweeping pardons of January 6 rioters, however, is already proving an issue for the DOJ, according to Politico. They write, the White House has brushed off questions on the subject, but Justice Department prosecutors should be worried about this, and there were suggestions based off of their briefs and statements in court last week that they already are, according to Politico. 1,500 pardoned, 33 rearrested. I can find just the one woman we heard from who decided not to accept her pardon. If that doesn't piss you off, though, wait until you hear what's on the White House's website commemorating today. We'll do that when the Ron Show returns. On Georgia Now, Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. I almost feel guilty even bringing this to your attention because most people aren't going to notice this. If you're just not one of those people that you go to the White House's website to see what they've posted, I didn't either. I don't normally, but I somehow it crossed my radar. This will make your blood boil, though, when you look at this page. At the top of the page, it's all black and white, by the way, the whole page. At the top of the page, you see photos of Nancy Pelosi lording over the J6 committee. And then this. President Trump took decisive action to pardon January 6 defendants who were unfairly targeted, overcharged, and used as political examples. They were not protected by the leaders who failed them. They were punished to cover incompetence. On his first day back in office, January 20th, 2025, President Trump issued sweeping blanket pardons and commutations for nearly 1,600 patriotic Americans prosecuted for their presence at the Capitol. Their presence. Many mere trespassers or peaceful protesters treated as insurrectionists by a weaponized Biden DOJ. This is on the White House official website. He fully pardoned most, commuted sentences, and ordered immediate release of those still in prison, ending years of harsh, solitary confinement, denied due process and family separation for exercising their First Amendment rights. The page continues. Thousands of Americans paid the price for political failures they did not create. This continues. Since January 6, 2021, Nancy Pelosi spent over 3 years and nearly $20 million in taxpayer funds on her partisan select committee. Liz Cheney, by the way, was on that. Adam Kinzinger, too. Republicans. Producing a scripted TV spectacle to fabricate an, air quotes, insurrection narrative and pin all blame on President Trump. I only have about 90 seconds left on this segment before I have to stop for break. I got to tell you, the timeline and the thumbnail photos of the arrested who were pardoned, it's, this is not just something that somebody slung together. Somebody's been working on putting this together for quite a while. This page is repugnant. It is galling. It is disgusting. There's just no other way to look at this except to see this for what. My God, how many of you read Animal Farm, for crying out loud? This is the pigs. These are the pigs doing their work. And I'll bring this home in the second half of this hour. I'm going to read to you some of the Georgians who were pardoned, who had been arrested, who were awaiting trial or serving time or whatever. Anyway, I want to let you listen to Chris Hardin. He is running to be the Democratic nominee to unseat Barry Loudermilk in Congress. He pointed this out on his social media page today.
And let's not forget, Barry Loudermilk is now on the congressional committee that is investigating the original committee that investigated him for his January 5th Capitol reconnaissance tour.
Yeah.
Nothing has changed since January 6, 2021.
Notably because those who did wrong face no repercussions for their illegal actions from their icon, cult leader himself, on down to all of those he pardoned. It's The Ron Show on Georgia Now, Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. Back after this.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is The Ron Show.
Remember, my radical leftist scum listener friends, we are the pinko commies. We hate cops. We are defund the police, yada, yada, yada. I want you to listen to this testimony from the House Select Subcommittee on January 6th.
Thank you all for the opportunity to testify and be here today. I was just a kid who had a dream of becoming a police officer and was lucky enough that it came true here with the Capitol Police. 5 years ago today, I was called a traitor, violently assaulted in the line of duty, punched in the face, pepper sprayed, and thought, I'm going to die here on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. My name is Winston Pageant, and I was an officer with the Capitol Police for over 5 years. I do not speak on behalf of all officers, nor the department, which I left 10 months later, but I believe my experience is not unique as one of many who showed up to work on January 6th like I did every day, ready to protect and serve the Congress, the congressional community, and the Capitol itself. Serving as an officer was the honor of my life, especially with the ceremonial unit honoring the inauguration of President Biden, as well as the lying in state ceremonies of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Officer Brian Sicknick, and Officer William Evans. I would be remiss to not mention honoring the life and service of Officer Howie Liebengood, who sadly took his own life just days after January 6th, 2021. On that day, I was assigned to the Civil Disturbance Unit, the Hard Gear Riot Team, on the West Front as thousands descended upon the Capitol from Pennsylvania Avenue. Before I knew it, we were completely overrun, and what started with mere insults turned into being brutally attacked.
Just tourists.
This should serve as no surprise to anyone. The evidence of violence is obvious and extensive. Hundreds of police officers, my friends, fought valiantly to defend the Capitol and our democratic process that day. From the West Front to inside the Capitol, the mob said to me, President Trump sent us, and we don't want to hurt you, but we will. While I suffered immensely on and because of January 6th, I do not wish to dwell on my own pain and want to be clear, this is not about me or any one person here today. The events of that day are bigger than any of us. What happened that day is wrong. It should go without saying. Pardoning criminals who severely beat me and my fellow officers that day is completely unacceptable.
Yes.
We cannot accept violent felons being pardoned and released back into our neighborhoods without consequence. That is not justice.
And yet it's happening.
Violence is never acceptable. It must be unequivocally condemned by the president and our fellow Americans, not selectively ignored or pardoned. I implore America to not forget what happened on January 6th. We must refuse to accept the normalization of violence. In this deeply divided time, I believe the vast majority of Americans have so much more in common than what separates us. And finally, to all the officers who continue to show up day in and day out in service to Congress and to our nation, thank you.
I'm just looking for MAGA to continue to back the blue. These blue, those blue, that blue. That day happened because of a lot of lying. Lying that continues to go on about that lying, by the way. We still have folks showing up on social media chiming in about stolen elections. Oh, the Fulton County thing was about unsigned tickets. It wasn't about ballots that shouldn't have been counted. If anything, you should be howling with indignation that anybody would even suggest that rightfully cast ballots wouldn't be counted just because someone chose not to sign a ticket. By the way, affirming, as we've talked about on this show before, that a law meant for Alberta, Canada was being honored. What? That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't mean squat. It has nothing to do with the outcome of that election. Now, don't get me wrong. If anyone wanted to do a hand recount of ballots in the state of Georgia, the loser had every right to ask for one. The loser of that election never did, perfectly within his rights to have done so. But he didn't. Instead, he kept casting aspersions and having lives threatened here in Fulton County. 2 women, a mother-daughter duo, being paid handsomely by the likes of Rudy Giuliani because their lives were imperiled. Lives were lost because of that lie and the orchestrator of that lie. The man who, by the way, has yet to ever show an ounce of culpability or take a second of responsibility for his role. But then again, the party of Donald Trump is a lot like Donald Trump. We don't apologize for nothing. We're Americans. Apologizing is akin to weakness. Being wrong is one thing. Saying you're wrong and apologizing for it, that's a bridge too far. Donald Trump today on January 6th.
We have ammunition. The problem is the fake news. That's why I like being on. I'd much rather do live television than do non-live because, when they say, as an example in my speech, peacefully and patriotically to the Capitol, peacefully and patriotically. Do you know that the Unselect Committee didn't report it, that I said those words? Do you know that the news never reported the words walk or march peacefully and patriotically to the Capitol? Do you know they never reported it?
3 words.
It's a scandal. The Unselect Committee never reported that. They never reported that Nancy Pelosi was offered 10,000 soldiers, National Guard soldiers, whatever you want. No, I don't want them. And the mayor.
Debunked.
The mayors weren't writing. She was more honorable about it.
Debunked.
But Nancy got caught when her daughter did a documentary. She's a documentariist. And she has her mother saying, it's my fault. I should have taken the soldiers or something. I saw that in the documentary. I said, whoa, this was a major story. Has she spoken to her daughter since that? Do you know?
I know if you're listening to the show and you listen to the show regularly, I probably don't need to change your mind or to bring this to your attention. You know, as well as everybody outside the MAGA bubble knows, that there is no video that shows Nancy Pelosi taking responsibility for not having the National Guard. PolitiFact reporting on that, though. In a brief video, then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said, I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more, referring to U.S. Capitol security, not the National Guard. They also point out that no member of Congress has the authority to activate the District of Columbia National Guard. Only the President, Defense Secretary, and Army Secretary do. And records show that Pelosi approved a January 6, 2021 request to seek support from the National Guard and push to get National Guard troops to the Capitol when their deployment was delayed by hours that day. Oops. So the buck doesn't stop with the President. So then I guess it should stop with the Defense Secretary or the U.S. Army Secretary who didn't step in to handle what Donald Trump chose for hours not to.
I could never have had the idea that a president of the United States would incite an insurrection on the Capitol of the United States, the symbol of democracy throughout the world, on the Constitution of the United States, which he took, and we all took, an oath to uphold. On the Congress of the United States, who that day had the congressional responsibility to accept the results, to certify the results of the election. The list goes on and on. And today, that president who incited that insurrection continues to lie about what happened that day. On my way over here, I saw on TV that he was claiming that we did not ask for the National Guard. I thank Representative Hinziger and as well as Elaine Luria for setting the record straight and other testimony that you've heard here. For over 3 hours, we begged him to send the National Guard. He never did it. He took joy in not doing it. It was savoring that. And right now, he was saying on TV today, I wanted to send it. They just wouldn't do it. His own Secretary of Defense, acting Secretary of Defense, testified under oath against what the president is saying today. maybe not in public, but under oath. God forbid that they ever put this president under oath. His people know never to do that because who knows what will happen.
Yeah, the Bible will explode.
But what he's saying today, still lying about it,
Yep.
is an insult
Yep.
to the American people.
Yeah.
Good thinking people in our country, and I believe in the goodness of the American people. Believing in their goodness is what gives us hope that we can move on from this even stronger. His lies that he continues to tell are an insult. The courage of our founders, the beautiful vision they had of this country.
I feel like if I were, say, co-parenting with Nancy Pelosi, this is where I would step in and say, no, I'm less optimistic. I think lesser. I do. I'm very upset. I'm very ashamed. And I know that's a long time to hold that grudge, but this is not unlike, and I hate to spill tea here. I hate to really even dive into my personal life. There are those who have asked me, have you forgiven your ex-spouse? No. My ex-spouse never asked for forgiveness. And I'm not one that just freely, willfully gives it out if it's not asked for. You know? It's not my, first of all, no. In all honesty, I would say that it might actually insult my ex if I did offer forgiveness. They might go, for what? And that's sort of at the heart of the problem. But again, that's, a conversation for another show and not this one. When I talk about the difficulties I have with having friends who are MAGA, it stems from anger. And I can't shield that. It's very hard for me to shield that. We're not talking about, good example here. I'm a Georgia Bulldog guy, right? Love my dogs. My friends who are Alabama fans, and this is going a few years back, so I apologize if you aren't even familiar with it. Well, you should be. Back in the 2018 National Championship game, Georgia, Alabama Crimson Tide. Georgia was ahead. Things were looking really good. And then there was this controversial call involving Tyler Simmons. The head referee, a fellow by the name of Dan Capron, admitted to miss this call during the game. Tyler Simmons was incorrectly flagged as being offsides on a blocked Alabama punt. Instead of Georgia being rewarded for a good play, Georgia got punished because of a bad call. Now, Alabama fans were never going to say, well, we should just give over the 2018 National Championship because of that one bad call. But that was a really crucial call at a really important moment. Momentum was clearly on Georgia's side. It would have been a shellacking had that continued. Alabama fans are going to brag about that national championship, knowing full well that it's a tainted national championship, right? Like they didn't earn it. Like it's kind of dirty. Bama fans don't care. I got over that. You know what I mean? Like it's just sports. It's just a football game. It was the football game, and it really clung to me for quite a while. But then Georgia won a couple of national championships after that. And so, all's well that ends, right? This is different. This is the United States of America. This is the country I was born in, have lived in, grew up in, and have had loved ones and relatives and friends defend, swore under oath to defend, put their lives on the line to defend. This is not football. This is different. Republicans and MAGAs, and they know a couple of things. They know in their heart, whether they'll ever admit it or not, that their leader is a grifting fraud, that he is a con man, that he lies like we breathe. They know that the American people, by and large, do not like him. A majority of he didn't even have a majority of the Republican Party fawning and fixating over him in 2016. He never won 50% or better of any state's primaries until it was just down to him and John Kasich at the end. And most of them are fully aware he lost the 2020 election. Most of them, whether they'll admit it or not, and they never would publicly, know full well that January 6th happened as a result of his months-long tantrum over losing the 2020 election. He's still throwing a tantrum over losing 2020. Like that's somehow going to be what mars his image after he passes. Like that is going to mar his image. Not the bankruptcies, not the grab him by the pussy, not his COVID response, not his multiple affairs. None of that's going to mar him. The fact that he lost an election, it just eats at him. He thinks that that's somehow going to be taken to the grave with him and become his legacy. No, sir. I hate to tell you, Trump, that's not all that's on your legacy. Not just that you lost 2020, but that you lost 2020. You showed no graciousness in the loss. You did, sir, incite an insurrection and then spent the next 4 years avoiding culpability, responsibility. You know, a man, an adult, like that woman we heard in the first segment, just owning up to her own misdeeds. That's the most grown-up thing a person can do. And Donald Trump, as you can clearly see, is no grown-up. He is a man-child in an old man's body. And the thing that I will always hold against MAGAs and Republicans who allow for it is that they had many opportunities. This is not about what Democrats can or can't do, or should or shouldn't do. It's a given. Democrats do not know how to spar with this. And it's not anything to do with his brilliance and everything to do with his base's ignorance. Democrats, we admit, we don't know how to communicate with stupidity or ignorance. We just don't. Guilty. We're not good at dog whistling to racists. Guilty. There are skills that Democrats do have that some Republicans have. You know, speaking to corporatism, America for yes. But when it comes to racism, usually misogyny, xenophobia, Islamophobia, we're just not built for that. We're not equipped, and so we're not equipped for dealing with Donald Trump or the MAGA base or speaking to them. It's just not. It's not in our vernacular. We just don't know how to do it. Guilty as charged. But all along, the power to derail Donald Trump, to derail all of the harm that he's doing to this country and splitting this country apart at the seams, not just politically, but socially. All along, the power rested in the Republican Party, who never had enough within themselves to stand up to him. When I come back, I'm going to share with you some of the names and crimes committed of those pardoned from Georgia on January 6th. We'll do that when the Ron Show returns on Georgia Now, Progressive Voices via TuneIn. By the way, it's not lost on me that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting had to shutter its doors. And meanwhile, this archive still exists on the NPR website. When you go to apps.npr.org, there is a January 6th archive, and you can look up folks by state even, or by any case status or type of violence level. Like Michael Bradley, 49 years old from Forsyth, Georgia. About a year after the riot at the Capitol, a tipster contacted the FBI to tell them that they had overheard Michael Bradley bragging about his involvement in the riot and about assaulting police officers that day. Court records indicate Bradley's photograph had been on one of the FBI's Be on the Lookout posters, according to the court records, and the FBI positively identified Bradley as the same person in the Bolo photograph after receiving the tip. The Bureau also issued a search warrant to Facebook to look at Bradley's account and allegedly recovered a photograph with the caption, "DC bound over the Hill soldiers," from the day before the riot. Bradley can also be seen in multiple photographs and videos from January 6, including from a tunnel leading into the U.S. Capitol, one of the most violent places that day. Bradley can allegedly be seen swinging a baton at police officers in an attempt to hit them. Bradley received a full pardon January 20, 2025. You got Philip Marion Crawford, who pushed through the crowd in front of the archway of the Capitol and began swinging his hands with closed fist at the line of police officers, according to federal prosecutors. Footage shows he attempted to pull an officer into the crowd. Later, Crawford picked up a fallen gas mask and threw it. metal part first into the line of policemen. In a different video, he could be heard yelling, "Hey, we're going to charge in that mother, okay? Are y'all pussies or what? Look at them. 1, 2, 3, 4. You ain't got on us. We're all of us. Come on." Court granted the government's motion to dismiss the case with prejudice. January 23rd, 2025. Oh, here's another. Kevin Douglas Creek of Alpharetta. Body camera footage from police officers appear to show Creek punching and kicking police. A complainant reported to the FBI he heard Creek talking about his role in the events of the day while visiting Northside Forsyth Hospital in Georgia a few days later, according to court documents, where he reportedly said he was bruised and had been tear-gassed attempting to get inside the Capitol building. Creek received a full pardon, January 20th, 2025. Not far from that scumbag lives Bruno Joseph Cua, 18 years of age, from Milton. A look through Bruno Cua's social media posts in the run-up and aftermath paint a portrait of a young man inspired by President Donald Trump. "President Donald Trump is calling us to fight," he allegedly wrote on Parler days before the siege on the Capitol, according to court documents. "He knows this is the only way to save our great country. Show up. Hashtag January 6th. It's time to take our freedom back the old-fashioned way." He received a full pardon, January 20th, 2025. There's Jacob Davis of Adairsville. According to court documents, Jacob Davis pushed against a blockade of police officers in the Lower West Terrace Tunnel at the U.S. Capitol shortly after 4 o'clock on January 6, 2021. After being rebuffed, he threw a long wooden board into the tunnel, which landed on the heads of the police inside. Davis, allegedly identified by his phone's location data and through images captured by closed-circuit video and officers' body cameras, arrested October 17, 2023 in his hometown of Adairsville. Court grants the government's motion to dismiss the case with prejudice. Back on January 23rd, 2025. Jorge Jose Fournier from my hometown of Grovetown, Georgia, 52. The hell were you doing there? William Gallagher, 65 of LJ. What were you doing there? Sylvester Maxwell, Alpharetta, 42. What were you doing there? Seth Sardi, 45 of Rockmart. I'm guessing there was a relation here. Sapane Sardi of Marietta, age 38. Leander Antoine Williams, 31 of Savannah. Also among the tourists. Oh, this epitomizes white nationalist, evangelical. This is chef's kiss going into my conversation with Andrew DeCourt next hour. Justin McAllister of Douglasville, Georgia. Open source video posted to YouTube shows Justin approaching a police line on the West Front Capitol grounds, holding a flagpole with a flag which read, "Jesus is my savior and Trump is my president." He also holds another flagpole and repeatedly uses both poles to strike at officers, allegedly making contact with the helmet of one. Arrested January 29th, 2024. However, the court grants the government's motion to dismiss the case with prejudice. Another Jack Wade Witten, age 30, from Locust Grove, Georgia. Among other charges, Jack is charged with, alongside 4 others, with assaulting officers with the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. According to video footage detailed in court documents, Witten began striking one officer with a crutch. He then grabbed the officer by the head and helmet and started to drag him down the steps in a prone position and over the top of another officer who had already been knocked to the ground. Witten also seen holding down the officer he dragged into the crowd, who was then repeatedly struck by other assailants. On January 15, 2021, people on Twitter began using the nickname Scallops, a reference to the pattern of his backpack, to refer to an unidentified man prosecutors now believe to be Witten. 2 days later, a person who went to high school with Witten called the FBI to identify him. That person also showed law enforcement a text message from Witten talking about a, quote, bad cop and saying he had, quote, fed him to the people. Witten received a full pardon January 20th, 2025. I know this is a talk show and that words are important. They're necessary. But sometimes you just have no words. I've spent 5 years sharing them. And 5 years later, with that man back in office and his base emboldened, the words escape me. Hour number 1 in the books. Again, Andrew DeCourt, professor, author. Up next hour. Thank you so much for listening on Georgia Now, weekdays 4 to 6. The replay 8 to 10 a.m. the following morning. 11 p.m. Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. Show notes, as always, at ronshowatl.com. Thanks for listening.
From the heart of the city too busy to hate, a progressive voice making too much sense for corporate media's comfort. This is The Ron Show, where we the people come first. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
All right, thank you so much for listening, whether it's on Georgia Now, weekdays 4 to 6 p.m., 11 p.m. Progressive Voices via TuneIn, the following morning, 8 to 10 a.m. on Georgia Now, or wherever you podcast. By now, you're aware, as well as I am, how social media works in its odd and mysterious ways. Things wind up in your feed, and you're like, how did that get there? I'm actually glad this guy's stuff did. He is Andrew DeCourt, founder of the Institute for Faith and Flourishing. I've mentioned this many times before. I'm an atheist, but conversations about spirituality still draw me in because they are so impactful in how the country and world operates and how leaders ascend and stay in power. Great example. He posted this on December 22nd, which is why I reached out to him. Andrew DeCourt posted on his Facebook page, which is just Andrew DeCourt, DeCort. Politicians are infamous for questionable character, but J.D. Vance evinces a special quality of cowardice, he writes. At the recent Turning Point USA America Fest, the crowd greeted Vance with roars and chants of J.D., J.D. He smiled and drank in the adulation. He then tried to make a joke about one of his greatest insecurities. That would be not being recognized by Nicki Minaj, but he simply came across as being insecure. Next, Vance declared that Dear Leader didn't put his followers through, quote, purity tests. We don't care if you're white or black, rich or poor, he continued. The Democrats don't care about anything other than transing their kids. After declaring his colorblind politics, Andrew writes, he celebrated his administration's negative net migration, and the crowd went wild. He continued, we have relegated DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, to the dustbin of history, which is exactly where it belongs. The crowd went wild with a standing ovation. Then Vance said, in the United States of America, you don't have to apologize for being white anymore. The crowd erupted with glee. We've all heard this. DeCourt continues, and there's the real heart of the matter, white fragility and white nationalism. Across American history, he writes, 44 of 45 presidents, 98% have been white. 112 of 116 Supreme Court justices, 97% have been white. The overwhelming majority of our 12,583 Congresspeople have been white. It took almost 100 years before a black man, Hiram Revels, was elected to Congress in 1870. 90% of AmFest speakers on their website were white or white passing. Imagine having that much of a monopoly on political power in a country and still celebrating that you've dismantled programming for more equitable leadership across the country. DeCourt continues a step further. Imagine having that much of a monopoly on political power in a country and still styling yourself as disadvantaged or oppressed group who needs defending. That is a level of insecurity, he writes, and self-obsession that boggles my mind. It reminds me of James Baldwin's wry words way back in 1961. What King calls community and what I think of as the achievement of nationhood is more simply and cruelly the growing up of this dangerously adolescent country. Andrew DeCourt continues, when I see J.D. Vance, I see a face of that, quote, dangerous adolescence. Vance has made a career out of refusing to grow up and keeping many white Americans addled by this dangerous adolescence. Relatively grown-up white people can say these things without hesitation. 1, America was founded on white supremacy. 2, white supremacy is genocidal, enslaving evil. 3, this injustice is still being exercised from the structures of our society. Exorcised, not exercised. And 4, the idea that white people are oppressed in America is a pitiful expression of the white insecurity that is cowered beneath white supremacy from the very beginning. Andrew DeCourt continues in this post on December 22nd. The hopeful thing is that politicians like Vance and organizations like TPUSA are reactions against the very slow process of America growing up from the infantile evil of white supremacy. Whether MAGA can drag America back to that great past again, in quotes he writes, remains to be seen. Vance clearly sees white Christian nationalism as the key to this struggle. Andrew DeCourt implores us to resist. Love your neighbors as yourself. Not with cheap words, but a way of life and public policy that reverences the dignity of every human. P.S., he writes, Vance's white-aggrieved anti-DEI politics comes down to 2 basic options. Either white people are so overwhelmingly superior to everyone else that white domination of the United States is what meritocracy generates. That's blatant racism and can only be defended with the most woeful level of ignorance. Or the United States has been built on massive racial injustices that produce this monopoly Programs are needed to rectify them, and you can either choose to support this change or not, which Vance explicitly doesn't. Either way, you end up with a white nationalist politics, which TPUSA clearly supports, and papers over with celebrities like Nicki Minaj. He offers one more PS postscript. When historians study this period of the American Empire, one of the great ironies will be that the hated enemy of American freedom was known as anti-fascist. I should mention, actually, that Andrew is an adjunct professor of peace and conflict at Wheaton College, founder of the Neighbor Love Movement, and founder of the Institute for Faith and Flourishing. Also, author of the book that just came out last fall, Reviving the Golden Rule, How the Ancient Ethic of Neighbor Love Can Heal the World. And he joins me now. Andrew, thank you so much. Happy New Year. How are you?
Happy New Year, Ron. I'm great. I'm happy to talk with you.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and order the book here in a little bit. Again, Reviving the Golden Rule. It's so funny that the Golden Rule comes up because I'm trying to remember what it was we discussed on this show a week or so ago about the Golden Rule and how it exists in almost every religion and is not something that someone like me who is agnostic or atheist can't also abide by. It just seems like, I don't know, common sense or being neighborly, which you, I think, really dive into a lot in your writing.
Yeah, for sure. The Golden Rule is really a basic principle against hypocrisy and enshrining mutuality in relationship. I treat you the way that I want to be treated. And in the context where Jesus introduces this rule, he assumes that we want to be treated well and that we want to be treated with dignity and safety. And this is a basic human need. It's a basic human desire. For me, as a person of faith, I think this is how we're designed, but definitely agnostics, atheists, people who don't identify with religious faith share this deep desire and this longing to be part of a society where this is how we see and treat one another and make laws and create culture.
I can't help but wonder how in the Donald Trump era, the last decade or so, we have seen how this man who is revered by so many in this country treats other people that he doesn't agree with or disagrees with or is challenged by. And I can't help but wonder or grapple with how someone who supports him, who professes to be spiritual or religious and wants their children to grow up to be respectful of others and say, yes, ma'am, and yes, sir. I mean, I live in the South, so that's just the thing, yeah?
Yep.
I can't help but wonder how those people try to balance their reverence for that man while also wanting to raise their children to be decent people.
Yeah, I share your disorientation, Ron. I'm an ethicist, and I often ask people, what do slavery in America, the German Holocaust in Germany, and the genocide in Rwanda have in common? And the answer is that they were overwhelmingly Christian populations. And I say that as a deeply committed Christian and follower of Jesus. The point is that religion so often can be twisted as a tool for power, and it has a kind of supercharged power because we claim that God is on our side and that if you disagree with us, you become an enemy of God. And this is the basest, lowest quality of religious identity, to try to use God as a weapon to control other people. And we've seen this throughout history. And so for me, part of the reason in writing this book, Reviving the Golden Rule, was to remind people of this profoundly rich, countercultural and deeply hopeful tradition of not using our faith as a form of power or control, but as freedom and dignity and mutual flourishing in relationships in which we treat one another the way that we want to be treated. So I think people of faith, and Christians in particular in the United States, really need to look hard in the mirror and ask ourselves, do the leaders that we support reflect the values of Jesus and just basic humanistic values, or are they really just cloaks and masks for the basics, power, money, status, sex, superiority, these basic drives that so often are just beneath the surface of what we say we're really after.
I think that last line, superiority, I think that one is the tool that seems to be of most use for the twisting, the manipulation tactic
Yes.
used by religion, especially in evangelical culture and conservative movement in this country, to continue feeding that furnace, so to speak.
Yes.
And historically speaking, we can go back and look at the evolution of talk radio, for example, and how that sprung from religious talk radio to talk radio, the corporatization of the radio medium in and of itself, and then the monetary portion of that, and how everything just sort of, centered around Rush Limbaugh. And then I think we get to what we see now in our political discourse at the top, the ugliness of it.
Yeah. I was just recently reviewing an interview that Steve Bannon did with David Brooks, and Bannon was talking about how his content is explicitly a street fight that is meant to win, and there will be no compromise in that goal. And you see how superiority is at the heart of that kind of discourse. And I would say, Ron, that I approach the human desire for superiority with a lot of compassion, because I think that it always reveals a deep sense of insecurity.
Yes.
I'm a big fan and reader of James Baldwin, who I think is one of the great American prophets, and he talks about white supremacy incessantly throughout his writing. But the thing that Baldwin says again and again is that this drive for superiority or supremacy comes from a deep wound, a deep insecurity, a deep feeling of actual inferiority. And so it's like an overcompensation to try to cover over something that feels deeply vulnerable. And I think what I'm about to say to you, Ron, doesn't really fit super great on talk radio, but human beings want to be loved. We're vulnerable creatures who are born and dying, and in between, we recognize how easily we're wounded, and we want to be cared for and feel like we're valuable. And so often we settle for a cheap substitute of trying to feel like we're better than someone else. I think it was like maybe Toni Morrison who said, if you need to stand on the backs of others in order to feel tall, like you have a really profound problem. But that's a lot of us. I mean, that's in me too, where I feel like, well, maybe if I can sound smarter than you in this segment, then, your listeners might think I'm important.
Andrew, that's a low bar.
The point is, though, that I think that this drive to superiority is really touching on a deep human need to be loved. And so rather than trying to satisfy that in this toxic way of being better than others, what if we could connect with that deep need by treating others the way we want to be treated and having this mutual vulnerability and dignity within a mutual security that is, the rule of law, which is being profoundly compromised at this time in the United States.
If you're just tuning in, I'm having a conversation, fantastic one, with Professor Andrew DeCourt at Wheaton College, founder of the Neighbor Love Movement and the Institute for Faith and Flourishing. His book, Reviving the Golden Rule, How the Ancient Ethic of Neighbor Love Can Heal the World, is out now. We'll continue that conversation when the Ron Show returns on Georgia Now, Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. Back with author and Professor Andrew DeCourt, whose social media post eviscerating J.D. Vance for his white nationalist dog whistling. I don't even know if it's dog whistling when it was very vocal, very loud, very audible at the Talking Point USA America Fest here recently. His book is entitled Reviving the Golden Rule, How the Ancient Ethic of Neighbor Love Can Heal the World. I think part of what makes me so disappointed in not just what J.D. Vance said at the Turning Point USA Summit, I've come to expect that now. It's that, we many of us have either having read the book or watched the movie, we know his backstory. And I remember when he became Trump's pick for vice president, I was disappointed that he accepted because, again, I know his background. I know his life story. I know that he then attended an Ivy League school. He's not a dumb man. He was in the Marines. He served in a diverse corps. And yet, fast forward to him at the Turning Point USA Summit, and it's as if he learned nothing. But I don't think that's the case. I think he's playing a role. I think he's playing to the bleachers, to the cheap seats. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, in the spirit of, reviving the golden rule and treating people how I want to be treated, I want to be careful to not denigrate or degrade J.D. Vance. He's a human being who I believe is made in God's image and has precious worth. So I'm going to start there.
All right. Yeah, you leave that stuff to me. No, go ahead.
But I will say that, I'm not J.D. Vance's counselor. I don't know him, but he and I are a similar age.
Mm-hmm.
And he strikes me as a deeply insecure person who feels a great desire to receive affirmation and popularity, and who is willing to compromise things that he said are his basic values in order to achieve success
Clearly.
and popularity. And, I see that as a sign of a very, very weak ego that's still, in a stage of what James Baldwin called a dangerous adolescence, that again is grasping after that sense of superiority to others and to control. I mean, J.D. Vance said horrific things about Donald Trump and then became his yes man and his second in command. So when I see J.D. Vance, I see a person who's really profoundly lacking in basic courage, integrity, the willingness to tell the truth, to be consistent. And I think that, Hillbilly Elegy can give us some of the backstory of the vulnerability, the insecurity, the suffering that he hasn't dealt with. And, Ron, I want to say something. I'm not really familiar with your show, but in my previous book called Blessed Are the Others, I try to unpack the Beatitudes of Jesus. And Jesus says, everybody knows it. Blessed are the poor in spirit, because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Then the next thing he says is, blessed are the grieving, because they will be comforted. And the third thing he says is, blessed are the nonviolent, because they will inherit the earth. I think that there's an order here where Jesus is saying, you need to recognize that you are a vulnerable, hurting person who has deep existential poverty. And then if you can begin to grieve that and process that pain and become aware of the sorrow and the suffering that lives inside of you, then you can experience comfort. And it's only when you've dealt with that poverty and grief that you can move into a non-violent agency that is creative and courageous, but it's not reactive and aggressive. And when I look at J.D. Vance, I see a guy who hasn't done his poverty work, and he hasn't done his grief work. And so we're seeing someone who's grasping for power, including through really, really disappointing violations of the rule of law and the exercise of violence, that for me, as a white guy who's around J.D. Vance's age, looks really, really cowardly. And so I think of J.D. Vance as a guy who has, a complex story, who hasn't done some of that vital inner work of processing the poverty and the trauma and the grief that he's experienced. And so he does what most of us do. He tries to get power, status, money. And so he's a mirror for us.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to say, a lot of this seems performative, and we see that a lot in MAGA culture. I grew up in the South. I grew up in the suburbs. My dad's a deer hunter, but we didn't lavish guns. We didn't take holiday photos with them or anything like that. We didn't have to have the biggest truck, on the block or any of that. But it all does seem awful performative and an overcompensation of some sort.
Oh, big time, big time. It's I think one of the most important books in American society right now is Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. He wrote that in the 80s, but it has such profound insight for where our culture is at. And we live in a culture that seems so profoundly addicted to spectacle, amusement, entertainment. I mean, in many ways, Donald Trump himself is a master entertainer. He's a master marketer. He's an amuser, and people seem to be bewitched by this. And J.D. Vance does this in his own way, but with, another kind of layer of schmaltzy sincerity. We see that in Marco Rubio as well. He kind of has that heartfelt quality. But yeah, there's performativity, there's image management up and down. I mean, even in Steve Bannon, a guy, who presents himself as this kind of hardcore street fighter, he's got performativity out the wazoo in his talks at Turning USA as well. And I mean, you see that explicitly, Ron, for example, in that Turning Point USA conference that you're referring to, where throughout these talks, where they're talking about things that are like existential, survival, the greatest social movement in history, saving our country, you've got, pillows and angel angel cream being sold on the bar across the screen throughout the whole thing. You know, it's a sales pitch. So it's so performative. It's so consumeristic. It's only barely hidden. And that's why I think a lot of people are really longing for a deeper level of authenticity that the work of loving your neighbor really demands.
So I'm wondering if there are, and I believe there are, voices on the left that can speak to that can counteract this white nationalist evangelical monstrosity that has blossomed over time like mold on a wall. Anyway, we are with professor and author Andrew DeCort. His book, Reviving the Golden Rule, How the Ancient Ethic of Neighbor Love Can Heal the World. We'll continue that conversation. I'll ask that question when The Ron Show returns on Georgia Now, Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast.
This is The Ron Show.
Heard weekdays, 4 to 6 p.m. on Georgia Now, 11 p.m. Progressive Voices via TuneIn, the replay the following morning, 8 to 10 a.m. on Georgia Now or wherever you podcast. My guest this afternoon, this hour, is author and professor Andrew DeCort, professor of Peace and Conflict at Wheaton College, founder of the Neighbor Love Movement and the Institute for Faith and Flourishing, author of the book Reviving the Golden Rule, How the Ancient Ethic of Neighbor Love Can Heal the World. We've talked a good bit about the confounding scenario where white nationalist evangelicism has really set the word of Christ on the back burner. Christianity, dare I say, marketed towards white Americans, has been hijacked and used for political gain. The messaging, however, of Jesus himself seems to be lost in all of that in recent decades. Here's what's happening with me. I'm cheering for, vocally, loudly, as much as is possible, to see a more of an ascendant voice from voices on the left. The likes of, again, I'm in Georgia, Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock. I have said on a number of occasions in recent months, I think he's one to watch. And of course, sometimes I'm talking about, political horse jockeying here. Is he a 2028 name? I think of, and have been a fan of for a long time, James Tallarico, the state legislator in Texas, who is now running for the nomination to be the Democratic nominee for Senate in Texas. I hear voices like those two, and it gives me hope. I'm not sure either one of them are charismatic enough to stem this tide, to sort of snap folks out of this mindset where they go to church and they think that going to church makes them Christian, but also being a fervent MAGA supporter, being America first, yada, 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 also aligns with their Christian ideology when either they're not listening to the message that they're getting on Sundays, or they're showing up to a mega church where the minister himself makes, a six-figure salary and drives a nice car and has a nice house as well. And again, it's all perform. I can't help but wonder. I feel as if I'm walking around, folks, like in that Apple series Pluribus, where I'm waiting on the population to snap out of it because they're just sleepwalking through an existence instead of noticing the existence around them.
Yeah, it's a really challenging situation. I think of someone like Martin Luther King Jr., who consistently emphasized that the ends and the means of public life need to be in alignment. And as you just said, part of the deep damage of Donald Trump in American society is that he has conditioned us. He's normalized this highly performative, highly amusement-driven, spectacle-driven political culture where charisma is so much more than content, where influence is so much more than integrity, where your capacity to gather a crowd makes you important rather than the quality of your character. And whoever it is that's being put forward for leadership, whether in a church context or in a local political context or on a federal level, I think we all need to ask for that realignment of the ends and the means of the content and the mobilization strategies that we're using for our society. And that's going to be really hard because we live in a society that is driven by consumerism, by the spectacle of self-importance. And I think that's also why, Ron, we see an absolute epidemic of loneliness throughout American culture and profound mental suffering and mental illness, because this quality of culture doesn't allow for the kind of deep, meaningful, vulnerable human connection that allows us to feel known and loved and to build trust in contexts of safety where we can have meaningful conversations and disagree in respectful ways. I think a lot of us are hungry to disagree and to maintain relationship rather than to enter into these kinds of tribalistic echo chambers where we're all thinking the same thing, but we're afraid of that because we've become so polarized. There's so much othering in our society that we think that disagreement is very dangerous and scary. And so I'm betting on living a life of integrity where relationships are valued, where our word is kept, and where I refuse to identify as right or left, as Democrat or Republican. I want to live in a society where values are taken seriously, where practices are embodied in daily life, and where we refuse to give loyalty and allegiance to people who are chasing these basic drives of power and money, however they package themselves. Mega church pastor, right, left, Republican, conservative, Democrat, progressive. But I realize this is a countercultural position. And I would say just more broadly, Ron, we need a cultural shift where we have third and fourth and fifth options in our society. And we break out of this kind of dichotomous, dualistic option of, well, it's the lesser of two evils. So many Christians use that argument to try to get behind Donald Trump. I think that we need to demand better and break out of this dichotomous kind of two-party system that we're in so that there can be more competition and there can be more accountability that comes out of that in our society. Yeah.
I don't disagree with that, but it's tough getting people to wrap their brains around ranked choice voting, let
alone
having
a long game.
A third or fourth option. You're right. We're with Andrew DeCourt, author of the book, Reviving the Golden Rule, How the Ancient Ethic of Neighbor Love Can Heal the World. You spoke of isolationism, mental wellness, loneliness, and I kept thinking about, to me, how dangerous the powder keg we live in spiritually is. And I speak mostly about white male fragility and isolationism and loneliness. And to me, the irony about all this is I feel as if this current political climate is only making that subset of the population feel more so the case, while all the demonization of all the others, whether it is Hispanic people, whether it is folks who align themselves with democratic socialism, whether it is Palestinian Americans or Palestinian people, or right now the Somalis, or when it was the dog eating Haitians, things like that. It rallies those communities more closer and feeling less lonely, I think, in some cases, to support one another. And then as the greater mosaic of anything outside the MAGA bubble, I just feel like this is like a tinderbox, like a powder keg ready to burst.
I completely agree with you, Ron. Again, to quote James Baldwin, he said that most dangerous people in the world are people who have nothing to lose. And Hannah Arendt, she wrote the book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, where she was really trying to excavate where did fascism come from in Nazi Germany? Why were people so susceptible to it? And Arendt makes this profound point that people in Germany were lonely, and that loneliness makes you feel superfluous. It makes you feel worthless, like you're just replaceable, expendable, discardable. And I think every human being knows how deeply painful it is to feel superfluous. I think that's why many of us hate our work, because we're consciously aware that I could be replaced tomorrow and no one would miss me.
Oh, for sure.
And I'm just fundamentally erasable. And this is the feeling that loneliness cultivates. And if Baldwin is right, that the most dangerous people are people who feel like they have nothing to lose, and if Arendt is right, that loneliness makes us feel worthless, then we're becoming more and more vulnerable to big men and charismatic movements who promise us importance. And I think that, Ron, this gets to the heart of why does Donald Trump repeatedly harp that this is the greatest, this is the best, this is the stunning moment? Why does Steve Bannon say, you MAGA people, you are the greatest social movement in history? It's stunningly ignorant. I mean, what about the anti-apartment movement in South Africa? What about the anti-slavery movement or the civil rights movement in the United States? What about the British anti-slavery movement? Steve Bannon is telling people who are basically in a mega church-like conference that they're part of the greatest social movement in history. I think that works, though, because people do feel so deeply isolated, insignificant, insecure, so replaceable. People are desperate for someone else to give them a sense of validation and importance. And I mean, this, in many ways, Ron, I grew up in a mega church, a Pentecostal mega church. I still am Pentecostal. But that mega church culture gives you the kind of quick fix of feeling like you're part of something big, something important, something that's changing the world. But the underlying problem is it doesn't solve the issue of loneliness, because you're still part of this largely anonymous performative crowd where, again, you're so easily replaceable. You leave, next Sunday, very few people even remember you were ever there. And that's largely the structure of what the MAGA movement is like for white guys like me, who are like, hey, you feel lonely, you feel insignificant, you feel like you're being replaced, like the marchers in Charlottesville said so many years ago, you will not replace us. Come be part of our crowd. And what I would like to say is not, oh, MAGA people, you're stupid. I want to say, no, that longing that you have for belonging, for identity, for connection is so important. I would say it's God-given and sacred, but it won't be satisfied in this kind of crowd-driven, charismatic, leader-driven, superiority-driven movement that will always lead to you being eaten alive and discarded. And we see that with how Trump, will go from telling somebody that they're like the greatest and then telling them that they're worthless and that they were never important to him. It's so obvious that he uses and abuses. But this is the pattern in these kinds of abusive relationships. So I would love to see white men in particular discover richer, deeper sources of belonging that are rooted in things like courageous vulnerability, compassion, accountability, grieving, and the exercise of real power rather than the kind of reactive, aggressive, macho power that, Americans have idealized, since the beginning.
Unfortunately, in MAGA, vulnerability and compassion are two words that come with implication of weakness. It's actually that white male isolationism that has been feeding MAGA, especially on the younger end, that I think is sort of baked in by design. Give me a second and I'll elaborate. We're with professor and author Andrew DeCourt on The Ron Show. Georgia Now, Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. Final segment, my conversation with author and professor Andrew DeCourt. His book, Reviving the Golden Rule, How the Ancient Ethic of Neighbor Love Can Heal the World. His social media posts really drew me in, especially after the Talking Point USA America Fest, J.D. Vance, with his white nationalist screed. I'll share a link to that in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. There's also something that you wrote earlier this week. You spoke of, growing up about hearing how bad people like the gays, the Muslims, Marxists are, and then you start chipping away at, the various points in your life where you went to community college and took a class with an openly Marxist professor who you were told to fear, and then you went to the Horn of Africa and you were surrounded by Muslim people who showed you the most astonishing hospitality. You met the LGBTQI+, et cetera. And to me, when we speak about that loneliness, that isolationism that is like a cancer on the soul of so many people, and I see it so much within white males and young white males in particular, and yet they're also being told to avoid going to colleges, going to the big cities where diversity is rampant. In fact, diversity is a dirty word, and I just I feel like this is just a perpetuation of the very ill that rests inside their soul. And I just don't feel like I think they do feel the pangs, but they don't understand the cause of those pangs. They're trying to, in a lot of ways, what happens in our healthcare profession, where we treat the temporary pain instead of treating the source of the pain.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ron. I would say that what you're talking about right now is a source of my deep moral rage
Mm-hmm.
against Donald Trump and the MAGA movement, and it's this: he's exploiting people's deep desires and needs in order to control them, not in order to help them come more alive.
Nope.
So if people can feel more lonely, more isolated, more afraid, they're more easily controlled, and they can be used as pieces, as instruments, as weapons, and then just like we do with those things, we throw them in the garbage and forget they ever existed.
Yeah.
That's dehumanizing. That's degrading. Again, for me as a follower of Jesus who believes that every person is a precious neighbor with infinite worth, I'm not able to treat people that way. I'm not able to see people that way. And yeah, I think that all of us have a vocation to deeply grieve the way that humans are being turned into instruments for power in American society. And I would say, again, Ron, in the spirit of James Baldwin, in the spirit of Jesus, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. We have to be honest about how this instrumentalization, this dehumanization, this othering of people has been the original sin of American society from the very beginning.
Yep.
And until we can come clean about that, be sober about that, be honest about, this society really uses people as slaves. It uses people. It doesn't relate to people and honor people and create a culture of justice. Until we can come clean about those deep problems that go far back in our society, I think we're going to continue seeing people like, whether it's Trump or someone on the left, trying to make people feel more lonely, more afraid, more outraged, more disgusted, more humiliated, so that they can become more controllable.
Which is what's so frustrating to me about the pushback on critical race theory, diversity, equity, inclusion, book banning, et cetera, and so on. There's this push to shroud our actual American history and the roots of racism and otherism and inequalities that are baked into our very way of life from day one to now. And this insistence on the right to continue to shield that from anyone, future generations for sure, to perpetuate this sort of division that we're just mired in and not getting any better at solving. That's the thing that really disappoints me the most.
Yeah, it disappoints me too. And I would point out that it also arouses my compassion because those are all signs of an insecure ego. Like, let's say that I'm sick and I really want to get well. And you're a doctor and you say, Andrew, you have cancer. And I think that there's some treatments that are going to help you get healthy. It's going to be hard. It's going to take time. It's probably going to be painful, but I think we can get there together. If I have a secure sense of self, I'll say, okay, let's do that hard work. I want to pursue health. But if I'm an insecure person, I'm going to say, how dare you say that I have cancer? How dare you say that I'm sick? I'm not sick. You're sick. And I start, becoming reactive and blaming. I think in many ways, the responses that we're seeing to things like critical race theory are the kind of very adolescent, insecure reactions to say, no, there's no racial problem in our society. And again, that's an expression of weakness, not strength. It's an expression of insecurity, not real confidence in oneself. And so I think, creating the cultural environments in which we can really be vulnerable and honest with one another is essential for our mutual healing. And that's why I call Neighbor Love an ancient movement that can heal our world. If I can see you as precious and value, then I can learn about your mistakes and weaknesses and failures and sufferings without trashing you. And if you actually value me, you can learn about all of my fallibilities and failures and sufferings and sorrows and still want a relationship with me and not trash me. But if we have an insecure ego and we don't have real relationship, then we're going to be grandstanding and performing and all the things that we've been talking about in this relationship, in this conversation, and having a very, very dishonest relationship. And I think, that's where we get to a situation where you have a white male like J.D. Vance who's gone to an Ivy League school, and he's talking about diversity, equity, and and inclusion as like the great enemy of America. I mean, the irony is just so profound that you have a country that has only had one African American president, that's had very few Supreme Court justices who are African American or people of color in general, who have had a disproportionate minority of people of color in Congress, and yet promoting programs that could provide more access to leadership for people of color is seen as some kind of inequity or as some betrayal of meritocracy. The level of insecurity is really
off
quite
the charts.
evident.
Yeah, off the charts. Yeah. Well, and also, mocking playing the victim card or the race card, while all the while, that's their full deck.
That's the full deck, yeah. And what I would want to say to your listeners is, how can we move deeper into a genuine posture of compassion where we're not falling into the trap of saying, look at those stupid people, look at those weak people, look at those evil people.
But engaging.
Because engaging and even defying the us and them language in general, because all that stuff is in me too. And I'm just trying to do the work of noticing it and catching it and being honest about it with my friends and with my wife and with you on this call. So this is not an us versus them thing. This is a human thing. I mean, I keep coming back to James Baldwin. I quote this in my book. He says that the great challenge of our humanity is to learn not to battle for it, but just to accept it. And that's a lot harder than saying, you will not replace us. We're the greatest. Let's become hyper partisan and trample our enemies. It's actually harder to say, like, how are you doing? What are you going through? How are your kids?
And it's funny, when you take the red hats off or you take the party labels off, those are valid conversations and are usually rewarding questions to be asked, if not to ask in and of themselves. Andrew Decourt, author, Reviving the Golden Rule, How the Ancient Ethic of Neighbor Love Can Heal the World. Man, thank you so much. Profound conversation. I'm glad we had it.
Thanks so much for having me on, Ron. And I think you said in the conversation that you might be agnostic or atheist, but I hear a deep spiritual longing and yearning in you too that I really respect. Let's keep searching.
So here's the crazy thing. I grew up in a Baptist church. I did marry, same sex, a Pentecostal minister's son. Even before then, I dated a Mormon for a year and a half, and that was a conversation every time I had a anything with caffeine in it. It's like I think if we're looking at the eyes of the Lord, you're doing worse anytime we're whatever. But yes, I it's funny, like to be where I am spiritually, and yet I've always had some sort of religious influencery around me in some way, shape, form, or fashion, nonetheless.
Yeah, well, I hear that longing in you, and I respect that. And I think, even the language you used about there being a cancer on the soul in our society, that is this yearning for healing that's inside all of us. And I want to continue this journey of seeking it in our society instead of just trying to eliminate one another. So I'm so grateful to share the conversation.
Yeah, I'm just a human coexist sticker, really. That's and those stickers get sneered at when you go to the suburbs or in MAGA bubbles. So that's how it is. Anyway, Andrew, thank you so much for the time today. I appreciate you joining the Ron Show. Thank you.
Grateful.
That is author and professor Andrew Decourt. In that social media post I spoke about where he, commingled with bad people, he wrote, "Today I observe the innumerable Christian leaders who unquestioningly support a sexual predator, a business fraudster, a power-hungry grifter, a man who revels in greed and indifference and violence in the name of Christ. These dear leaders taught us to tell the truth, live with integrity, and suffer for Jesus, but they can't muster the basic decency, much less the moral courage to criticize Trump's emphatically sodomite character." In that same post, Andrew writes, "I find this astonishingly obvious, but utterly essential wisdom. The bad people are often good, and the good people are often bad, or at least behave badly. I'll add to that, those bad people don't want you to meet the good people either. Why is that? You should be asking." That'll do it for The Ron Show. We air 4 to 6 p.m. weekdays on Georgia Now, 11 p.m. Progressive Voices via TuneIn, 8 to 10 a.m. the following morning on Georgia Now. Show notes at ronshowatl.com.